today. So, welcome to this Beyond Beckett session on applying for PE teacher training. I'm Maria Dobranska and I work as a careers consultant, and I predominantly work with the School of Sport, hence the reason for running this session, as I know PE teacher training is a really popular route for students and graduates, particularly in the School of Sport. But hopefully some of the advice in the session will be also useful to you if you hail from another part of the university. So welcome, I hope you enjoy. Please feel free to ask questions throughout the session in the chat box. There is no such thing as a silly question. One thing to make clear at the start is that actually teacher training, applying for teacher training can be confusing. It can be complex because there are so many different routes in, as we'll see. There are lots of nuances. So if you are feeling confused about the process, you are not alone. And like I said, it can be complex. So, the more questions you ask, the better, because it's important that you feel clear and that you understand the process and your options. So do feel free to ask questions now and moving forward. As we'll see throughout this session, there's actually lots of support and information out there for you. So, you do take advantage of that. Just some housekeeping for today. If you can keep your microphone and video off, it will minimize the background noise, which is helpful as we are recording this session. We're recording all the sessions as part of Beyond Beckett, so you can watch them back and then they'll be available to anyone else who wasn't able to join in today. So the session today, we will be talking about the different routes in to PE teacher training. There's not just one way in. Funding options, the application process, and where to get that additional information and support that I've just mentioned. So what routes can you take into PE teacher training? Well, there's the university-led route. So applying to university, like you did for your undergraduate degree, applying for that postgraduate qualification through a university. There's lots of different universities that offer PE teacher training, and some students actually prefer to stay with the university route. It's what's familiar to them. You've been immersed in university for the last 3 or 4 years. And some prefer that. With the university route, you will spend a few weeks in the classroom environment, so the lecture environment, so very much what you used to. And some people feel that that's a nice comfort blanket as they make that transition from student to teacher. And they like having, a little bit more contact time in the classroom before they're let loose in a school. So that's the university-led route. As part of that, that taught experience, so that time in your lectures, you will have 2 short placements where you'll be sent to 2 different schools and have some practical hands-on experience of teaching. Again, some students actually prefer that they get to go to 2 different schools because you see teaching in different environments. You get to experience teaching students from different backgrounds, different areas, and that can give you a really well-rounded view on teaching, and it can help to guide you moving forward in your career and help you to learn more about what type of school environment you prefer to teach in, and what groups of students, for example, that you really like teaching. So the university-led route does have a lot of advantages in that context as well. You've also got a school-based route into teacher training. You'll generally hear these referred to as either a SCIT or school direct. It's important when you're applying to a school-based teacher training route to check whether there is a PGCE included or not, because not all SCITs or school directs will include a PGCE. Most do, but it's just being aware that not all do. So worth checking if you want that PGCE. The PGCE qualification is internationally recognised, and that means it will mean that you can teach abroad, for example. So important to check that the PGCE is included. Now, some school direct places are funded. However, if you go down the salaried school direct route, you're usually expected to have a good few years work experience under your belt, because with the salaried school direct route, you'll be teaching pretty much from day one. So it does kind of feel a little bit about being thrown in the deep end. You are supported, you will engage in some observed lessons first off, but that is why the salaried school direct route will require you to have a significant amount of teaching experience before you apply. Ethically, that's right, because, you don't want to be thrust into the classroom environment without any prior experience. So that's worth considering. However, there is an unsalaried school direct route as well. The skit and school direct route are very, very similar. Some skits will mean that you can have multiple placements, like I described with the university route, where you actually get work experience in various schools, in a couple of different schools, and that can again be quite beneficial if you are very new to teaching, because it gives you um, the advantage of seeing teaching in different environments, which can be hugely beneficial when you're starting off and trying to map out where you feel most comfortable, what type of environment you feel comfortable in. Now, it's up to you. I don't know whether you're wanting to teach in primary or secondary, but it's worth bearing in mind that with primary now, there is a primary PE specialist route. That's not always existed, so it's worth exploring if you are in the situation at this moment in time where you're torn between primary and secondary. Secondary, you can apply to teach PE. Primary, you now can be a PE specialist. However, you will be expected to teach across the curriculum still. You are not just going to teach PE necessarily. So that's worth bearing in mind at primary, that you do teach across the curriculum, but you do have that specialism in PE now as well. Something new as well this year, there are going to be postgraduate teaching apprenticeships. Again, that is a salaried route into teacher training. It's quite a new route that's available to you this year. You will be paid on a unqualified teacher salary. So there is a bracket for that that's available on the Get Into Teaching website, the sort of pay bracket. It does vary by teaching provider. But that's another route that you might consider if you want to get going with teaching, be quite hands-on from, very early doors, and spend, pretty much all your time in the school, as opposed to having that mix of lectures and school experience. The teaching apprenticeship may well be worth looking into as well. So you can find out lots more information on the website that I've listed here, so UCAS. There's two main websites that you can use to explore the routes into teacher training and get lots of other help and advice. And I'll be referring to them lots throughout this session. And those are the UCAS website and the Get Into Teaching website. Those two websites I prefer to send students to, because the information there is up to date. Teacher training, routes into teacher training actually change year on year. There are always changes every year, even if they're tiny ones, sometimes they can make a difference to you. So it's important that you're accessing websites where the information is really up to date and reflects this year's applications. So the UCAS one and Get Into Teaching ones are the ones that I would suggest to you, because they are the ones that are up to date, and you will get accurate information on them. So ones definitely to explore. Funding options for PE teacher training. Unfortunately, there aren't the sort of bursaries that are available for other subjects that there is a shortage of supply of teachers in, such as maths and science. However, you do, like I said earlier, have the option to explore the salaried routes through the school direct programs and the postgraduate teaching apprenticeship programs. Like I said, for the school direct salaried programs, they do expect you to have, quite a significant amount of teaching experience under your belt. So it's worth exploring nonetheless. If you do have some significant experience. The non-salaried teacher training, you are still going to be eligible for a tuition fee loan and a maintenance loan. That's means tested is the maintenance loan. And if you are a parent or have a disability, there is extra financial support available as well that doesn't have to be paid back. Again, the Get Into Teaching website, I've put the link at the bottom of this page, is a great place to explore exactly what amount you might be entitled to. So that's worth bearing in mind as well. Around there isn't necessarily any bursaries available, but you would be entitled potentially to a tuition loan and maintenance loan, but the amount you receive will vary depending on your own individual circumstances. It's worth bearing in mind as well that teacher training is, the equivalent of a full-time job. So it isn't the sort of scenario that you might be in at the moment as an undergraduate student where you can balance part-time work with your studies. It is very full on that year of teacher training, that first year. There is a lot of work involved. We don't want to disguise that. So, you would struggle to have a part-time job alongside committing to teacher training. So from a financial point of view, that's worth considering. And an important consideration. We do have a money advice team here at Leeds Beckett, and they are great people to talk things through with if you are worried about the financial implications of engaging in teacher training. They are great people to chat to, and they'll have some advice for you as well. So the application process, it's worth familiarising yourself with this now if you are intending on applying this year, because it can feel a little bit of a lengthy process and it will take you time. It's not something you can just do overnight. You can't just rattle off an application for teacher training overnight. The earlier, therefore, that you can start familiarising yourself with this process, the better, because you will be in a far better situation. So it's great that you're tuning into this now, actually. So where to apply? UCAS, for a good number of years has been the one place to apply for teacher training. But this year, for the 2021 starters, there is a new government service called Apply for Teacher Training. Now, ultimately, this service will replace UCAS. However, this year there are two places effectively. After this year, in another year's time, it will be one. However, for the 2021 cohort, there are two places you can look. So there's UCAS, which actually will still continue to house the majority of teacher training opportunities. However, it is also worth looking at the Apply for Teacher Training website as well, as that will have a limited number of providers on it, but there are providers on that website, so worth looking at that, worth looking at both of those sites. Now, when do you apply? Well, typically teacher training opportunities open in October for each year's cohort. So if you want to start your teacher training in 2021, the best time to look for opportunities is in October. We don't have a fixed date yet. As soon as we have a date for when those applications will open, we will be publicising it. So, keep an eye out on emails from your careers team. And do keep an eye out on the Get Into Teaching website. Now, you can sign up for alerts on the Get Into Teaching website. I strongly advise you to do that because you will get so much information from them and they will tell you about the important dates that you need to be aware of, because PE teacher training specifically is very popular. You're probably already aware of that. It is a very popular route. So the earlier that you apply, the better, because you don't want to be in a scenario where all the places on the program that you want to apply to become full just because you weren't aware of that opening day. So do sign up to the Get Into Teaching website so you don't fall into that trap. So you can start applying usually from October. So the earlier the better. If you are unsuccessful the first time that you apply, so initially you're allowed to apply for up to 3 training providers, and they can be a mix between university-led, school direct, a skit. You don't have to just put all your eggs in one basket and say, yes, I'm only going down the university-led route if you're interested in something different. So you can apply for up to 3 different training providers in Apply One. So that's your first round. If you are not successful in your application to any one of those providers, you can then apply again in what's called apply to, and that opens a little bit later, usually around Christmas or January time. We tend to find that apply to then opens, and in apply to, you can then send off one application at a time. So rather than applying to 3 in one go, like in apply one, you will apply one at a time to different teacher training providers. So that's worth bearing in mind. It's not all over if you don't hear back in that apply one. You do have a second shot at it in apply two. And there are usually, providers that are still there. It might be a smaller pool, but it's certainly, the game is certainly not up. So try not to worry too much about that. So this is the program. There's a really neat diagram here. Again, this is taken from the UCAS website. And I think I just included this because I think it really maps out the process quite neatly. So you apply online, UCAS or the government website, you find the programs that you're interested in, and you select up to 3 of those programs. You have the teacher training providers then have up to 40 working days to consider your application and make a decision as to whether they will be inviting you to an interview or not. So you wait to hear back. So it will take up to 40 days. If you are then successful with your choices, or if you decide actually you decline any offers that you received, because you were actually absolutely under no obligation to say yes if you are offered a place with a provider. If you change your mind and think it's not for me, that's fine. You can then use apply to apply to other teacher training providers. So that's worth bearing in mind, that process there. I'll just get this presentation back. It's just paused a little bit, sorry there. So that's worth bearing in mind there. And then if you do get an offer and you accept it, you'd go into UCAS and accept it through that tracking system there. So what else is involved in the application process? That's, it's not as simple as it might look there. The application process will mean that you register, as we've just discussed. You'll select your 3 programs. Then you'll have to complete your personal details, education history, and work history. So, if you aren't sure about, what GCSE results you got, dig them out now, okay? Because you will need them to hand. So make sure you have your full education history in front of you when you go to apply. You need to enter it in. You need to enter in your results. For teacher training in secondary, you need maths and English at grades A to C. For primary, you need maths, English and science at grades A to C at GCSE level. So do make sure that you have your academic history up to date, and you're familiar with it, because for some people it's a long time ago. They're not quite sure where they've put their certificates. So use this summer period to get all your documentation in order. You'll also have to fill in your work history as well. So it does take quite a long time. This is what I was saying earlier about it not being something that you can just do overnight. You can't rattle it off, because it does take quite a long time to fill in all of your education history, all of your work history as well. And then on top of that, you have to supply 2 references. So your application won't actually be processed unless your references come back. So when you supply your references, make sure you've told the people and asked them, asked your referees whether they're happy to provide you with a reference, because they will have to submit it. They will have to give their reference before your application can be progressed any further. So usually, students will have an academic reference. It's a good idea to have an academic reference. So think about who might be able to supply that. It might be your academic advisor. It might be an academic that you've struck a really good relationship with. So think about who that might be and ask their permission. Bear in mind, they will be asking for those references at a very, very busy time in our academic calendar. Your academics will be very busy around October, November time. They're in the thick of teaching. So do give them a heads up and do ask for their permission. Other referees that you might want to consider are your current line manager if you're working part-time, anybody that has supervised you during voluntary work experience, any placements that you've undertaken. If you've got one from a school, that's great. Ask ask their permission. It's usually the head teacher that will supply it. So do get those in order beforehand. Again, not something you can do overnight. And you want those referees to be aware that they will be contacted, and you as a gentle reminder to them, it will hold your application up if they don't get back to UCAS, quite promptly. Another important part of the application process, and something that tends to take the longest amount of time, is the personal statement. Now, the personal statement, I've got a separate slide for this. Again, it needs a lot of time, it needs a lot of thought, because ultimately it is that will convince a teacher training provider whether you have the potential to forge a successful career as a teacher. So that is a really, really important part of the process. It's really it's what a lot of teacher training providers will be influenced by in your application. So it's worth spending a lot of time and energy on the personal statement. If you're then successful in your application, you will be invited to an interview. Now, the interview, just saying it's an interview, is probably a little bit misleading, because it's not usually just a face-to-face interview. There are other stages involved. It can be actually a full day. It's usually half day at a minimum of your time. So bear that in mind. It can include a group or task discussion. So something around current educational issues. In your interview, you will certainly be asked something about current educational issues. So make sure you are clued up on what's happening in the education sector. So if you are applying for primary, what's happening in the primary education sector? What are some of the challenges that it's facing? What are some of the developments? So make sure you're clued up, make sure you're tuning in to the literature in that area, reading, the education section of newspapers, you're following the relevant sites on social media. It's really, really important that you do that now, because by the time it comes to your interview, you'll have a really good idea of what's happening in the sector. Make it easy for yourself. Like I said, follow the relevant publications on social media, because that's quite digestible for you. And come October, you'll find you've got you're really well versed in that area. You might be asked to deliver a short presentation. And the topic usually is given to you beforehand. However, sometimes, you might be asked to prepare it on the day. So do bear that in mind. And through that, they're usually assessing your teaching capabilities, your teaching potentials, how have you structured it? How have you made it inclusive? So do bear that in mind. Now, this year, there aren't the literacy and numeracy tests that there have been in previous years. So usually, as part of the initial application stage, you were asked to do a literacy and numeracy test. That's not the case now. It's at the discretion of teacher training providers how they assess your capabilities in those areas. So that means that they may ask you to do a literacy or numeracy test at the interview stage. They might not. It might be something that they build into their course. It's not quite clear yet, because it's now been devolved to individual teacher training providers to decide how they want to ascertain whether you have the right level of literacy and numeracy. Our advice to you is, expect to be assessed on it somewhere along the process, and it's likely to be in the interview stage. But your teacher training provider that you apply to will have more information on that. So, do ask them if it's not clear to you how that will be assessed. Is it going to be assessed? If so, how it will be assessed. So the personal statement, as I have already alluded to, is a really, really crucial aspect of your application, and it will take you longer than you might expect. And this is why I'm recommending to you that you start putting that together over the summer months. You start to get a loose outline of it, because whilst in the careers team, we are really happy to check through your personal statement and offer advice. We're not a spell checking service, but we can offer advice on areas that you might want to develop it. We, like your academics, are very, very busy at that time of year. We are a small team, and it might take you a couple of weeks to be able to get an appointment with us. So the earlier you can do this, the better, because we can check over it earlier on. We can provide advice, and that gives you time to do those rewrites. So yeah, summer months are a great time to start putting energy into your personal statement. Your personal statement really has two purposes. It's to show that you understand the role that the course qualifies you for, and it's to show that you have the necessary skills, knowledge, and enthusiasm to succeed as a teacher. So structure can be really important in your personal statement and can really help you out. So think about your structure before you start. I've put down a suggested structure here. So an intro. So why are you applying for teacher training? Why do you want to be a teacher? And try and stay away from the really cliche statements if you can. Actually, really spend some time thinking about, okay, why do I want to teach? Why? What is it about teaching that excites me? It might have been that you had an inspirational teacher at high school or primary yourself, and that since then that's really whet your appetite. It might be that through your work experience, you had a really wonderful experience of teaching. What is it about teaching that really interests you? Why do you want to commit to that profession? So that's a nice intro. And then you want to include information about your work experience and how it's increased your understanding of the role. So have you got any work experience in schools that you can draw on, in sports clubs, youth clubs, working with young people in any setting, that you can use to demonstrate some of the qualities that you will need for a teacher? So that being said, it's worth researching what are the key skills I need to be a teacher. What are some of the key qualities that teachers need to have? So there's some useful websites that I've put links to at the end of this presentation that will help you to explore that further. Prospects.ac.uk is a really good place to start, as it really maps out some of the key competencies that you need to be a teacher. So think about how you can use your previous work experience, wherever that might be, to demonstrate some of those skills and qualities. Because ultimately, teacher training providers want to make sure that you understand the rewards of being a teacher and also some of the challenges of being a teacher. It's not rosy all the time. And one of the key traps that I see sports students in particular falling into in their personal statement is that they will focus so much on their love of sport that they actually forget to talk about their love of teaching. Whilst it's important to demonstrate that you've got that subject specific knowledge, that's not your entire application. Remember, fundamentally, your role is as a teacher. So spending your entire personal statement talking about your love of sport isn't going to put across a convincing account about why you've got the qualities to be an effective teacher. So you might want to think, well, how, as a PE teacher, how will I involve everybody in a PE lesson? Bear in mind, you're really enthusiastic about teaching PE, you're really enthusiastic about sport, but not everyone will be. How do you make sure that everyone in your class has equal access to the material that you're teaching? How can you enthuse a pupil who is really reluctant to engage in your lesson? How do you manage their behavior? If you've got a class of 30, how do you manage the behavior of everyone so that lesson runs smoothly? How do you manage your time effectively so you cover the material that you need to? How do you work flexibly to account for unexpected events that might arise? So all of these things you can be thinking about, and you can be thinking about, where you've developed some of those qualities that you need to be a teacher through your previous work experience and your academic studies. But don't just focus on the love of sport. That's an aspect of it. An aspect of it is your subject specific knowledge in physical education, but it's not the full personal statement. And that's something I see students fall into the trap of all the time. And again, in that intro paragraph, they'll open it up saying, I've always loved sport, and sport to me is my be all and end all, but they don't mention teaching. And this is a teaching position you're applying to, so don't fall into that trap. Also, with your personal statement, you do have a word limit. The current advice is 47 lines of text. That's not actually a great deal to fit in everything that you need to fit in. So do bear that in mind. That can actually take a lot of time to trim your personal statement down. Our advice is just to write it, get the words there, and then do your editing. But that can take a little bit more time than you actually think. And again, in the careers team, we're here to help you along with that process. Sometimes talking it over with us can just be really helpful. If you're thinking, oh, I don't know how to articulate why I want to teach, because sometimes it can be tricky to write that down. simply talking to somebody about it can be really helpful, and it can help with the writing process. So talk to people at home, talk to us in the career service. It can actually be more beneficial than you might think just to talk it through. So we're here to support you with that. So additional information and support, like I've mentioned, there is so many places where you can get extra help with applying to teacher training. Like I've said at the start of the session, my two top ones are UCAS and the Get Into Teacher Training website, because they're up to date. Now, the great thing about the teacher training website as well is that you can sign up for the teacher training advisor service. Now, you can sign up for that now if you want to apply for the 2021 teacher training cohort. They offer so much support. They offer one-to-one support, so you can actually speak to an advisor, which is hugely beneficial. So if you've got any questions, they're a great place to go to. They are real experts that have the most up-to-date information. So I can't recommend that enough. And that's where you get all the latest information about when things are opening. Lots of top tips. There's loads of videos on there talking you through every single stage of that application process. Other places to look, Target Jobs, they have some great resources. A lot of the resources on the Target Jobs website and the Prospects website are actually written by careers professionals. So professionals who work in careers departments across the country, who are completely impartial, and that's really important to have that impartial advice. So great places to look again. And, like I mentioned, the prospects one is a good place to look into for that overview of the skills that are required from a teacher. Now, if you're thinking about where you can get some extra experience, and you might be thinking about, okay, well, I'm a bit worried about, well, I do my teacher training, how I get a job afterwards. I might need a little bit more experience under my belt. Education recruitment agencies can be a great place to gain paid work experience as a cover supervisor, perhaps, or a classroom assistant. So we've got a resource on MyHub that provides you with details of some education recruitment agencies. Now, I'm really conscious about the current situation. Lockdown may, for some of you, have meant that your work experience in schools that you'd had planned out for some of the summer months has been cancelled, and we're really empathetic to your situation. However, we've been in contact with our School of Education. We've been in contact with a national body for careers advisors, where there is a specialist teaching arm. And the advice there really is that, whilst it's really beneficial to have work experience in a school, you're not going to be penalised if you've not been able to get some. It's not a mandatory requirement. It can be hugely beneficial, don't get me wrong, because it helps you to understand more about the profession. Is it for you? Where do you fit? Do you fit in primary, secondary? What's your preference? So if you can get it, please do, because it's more important for you more than anything, just in terms of your career decision making. But it certainly isn't going to be a deal breaker in your application, because I think teacher training providers are really conscious that, many students will have had ring-fenced, May, June, early July to get some work experience in schools, and that may not have been possible. So the best thing to do is to think about where your other experiences have provided you with the transferable skills that can demonstrate that you have the qualities and potential to be an effective teacher. So I hope that's helpful. But some other ways you can be getting work experience, or finding out whether teaching is for you, finding out about the differences between primary and secondary, is through arranging an informational interview with a teacher. So you might know somebody in your network, your friends might know somebody who's a teacher. Your parents, your family might have connections with a teacher. You can actually connect with teachers via LinkedIn. You can see any Leeds Beckett graduate who's on LinkedIn and is currently teaching through using our alumni tool. So you simply go on LinkedIn, the Leeds Beckett page on LinkedIn, and then there'll be a tab saying alumni, and you can search for alumni who are teachers, and you can approach them. It's absolutely fine to approach them and saying, I just wondered if I could chat to you about your experiences as a teacher, because that can unearth an awful lot. What's their day to day like? What are some of the challenges they face? How do they deal with them? What are some of the techniques that they use? What do they wish they'd known when they'd first started out? That information can be really, really powerful. So don't underestimate the usefulness of an informational interview. And that's absolutely something you can be doing while we're on lockdown. You can be sharing your knowledge and expertise, particularly if you've studied a sports related course. you know think about how you can be supporting young people with their physical education. We've all seen the Joe Wicks PE lessons. He's certainly not following the curriculum. Perhaps you could be thinking about some way that you can put out content out there that is linked to the curriculum. So there's certainly things you can be doing. Just because we're in lockdown, it doesn't mean you have to stop. So informational interviews, sharing your knowledge and expertise, which you'll have bucket loads of through your degree. You might not realize it, but you really do. So think about, whether it's a blog, whether it's a vlog. There's certainly things that you can be doing to show that you're passionate about teaching, you're knowledgeable about it, and you understand some of the skills and qualities and that you need to be a teacher, and that you're evidencing them through some of your extracurricular activities there that you can absolutely continue with during lockdown. So that's it in a nutshell. That's my walkthrough of applying for PE teacher training. Like I said at the start of the session, I'm conscious that, I've done a really simplified overview here, but it can feel very complex. Don't worry if you've got lots of questions, that's very natural. Don't be afraid to ask for support. The earlier that you ask for it, the better, because come October, we in the careers team want you to feel ready to go. We don't. You'll have started potentially your final year of study there. If you are heading into your final year, you might already have graduated and be working. So make life easier for yourself and prepare. It really will pay dividends, and we see such a difference between the students that start early and those that don't. So, some calls to actions: sign up for the Teacher Training Advisor Service and write that first draft of your personal statement. And feel free to get in touch with the careers team if you want any support with that over the summer months. We are here throughout the summer. For you, something else worth bearing in mind is that we are here for 5 years after you graduate. So once you've finished your PGCE, even if it is at another university or if you've gone down the school direct route and you want help in applying for your first NQT position, we can help with that as well. So we're here throughout, not just for your next step. We're here for many steps beyond that. So if you've got any questions, feel free to add them in now into the chat box. I'm more than happy to stay around and answer a few questions. But thank you very much for your time today. I hope you found it useful. Please do not hesitate to get in touch if you've got any other questions whatsoever. Take care, all.